Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 20 July 2023 program of Naval Order United States Continental Commandery Maritime History Virtual Lecture Program. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, I want to remind everybody that the Naval Order has a tremendous mission to preserve, promote, celebrate, and enjoy our nation's maritime history and heritage. To learn more, I invite you to visit the Naval Order's website at navalorder.org. Also, the Continental Commandery is unique in that we serve companions who do not live close enough to any of our 19 local commanderies to participate in their activities. And we have been created in order to provide programming and opportunities to participate in mission fulfillment for those who aren't living close to their local commanderies. And you can visit Continental Commandery's website as shown below. A couple of housekeeping before I introduce this evening's guests. One, if you have any questions or comments to make, there is a comments box, and we invite you to post them during the presentation. And after the formal brief, you'll have an opportunity, or I'll have an opportunity, to share your questions with Captain Lilly. Without further ado, then, I want to introduce Captain Michael Lilly. Captain Lilly had a distinguished career as Hawaii's Attorney General as a trial attorney. He's also a founding director emeritus of the USS Missouri Memorial Association, which operates Battleship Missouri as a memorial. And as we discussed earlier this week, it's also the location of a statue of Admiral Nimitz that was funded and installed by the United States and Naval Order of the United States. He's also authored Nimitz at Ease, relating how his grandparents helped Nimitz cope with the stresses of command to win the Pacific War. He's a retired surface warfare captain who had combined 30 years of active and reserve service. Mike, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much, Captain.
You've got a. It's great to have you here, and it was great chatting with you earlier this week. You have a fascinating subject this evening to talk about the myths around Captain Cook's so-called discovery of what were formerly called the Sandwich Islands, and I won't steal any thunder on that one. What got you interested in that in the first place?
Well, I'm a fifth generation Keikioka Aina, meaning I go way back to the 1840s here, and I've always been fascinated by Hawaii history. And as I grew up, Captain Cook was famous for being the first European to land on our shores. As I'll explain shortly, when I was a teenager, I was exposed to an alternative version of that, that it may in fact have been the Spanish. And I think at the end of my presentation, I may convince you that the Spanish were the first that came here.
Terrific. Well, without further ado, I want to give you the deck and the con, and look forward to watching and hearing your presentation.
Okay, this is my discussion is about who was the first European who have discovered the Hawaiian Islands. The conventional wisdom, one that I learned growing up, and probably all of you, is that it was Captain James Cook on his third voyage aboard the HMS Resolution on January 18, 1778, when he discovered Hawaii. And if you Google Captain James Cook first to discover Hawaii, you're going to get millions of hits. That's been the conventional wisdom. Here's some examples. Life magazine, 1948. When Captain James Cook discovered the islands in 1778, 300,000 natives were living there. Or the Encyclopedia of Canada's Peoples, 1999. The British explorer Captain James Cook is credited with having discovered Hawaii for Europe in late 1778. And the book Humanity and an Introduction to Cultural Anthropology in 2011. In January 1778, 2 British ships under the command of Captain James Cook discovered the Hawaiian Islands, and thousands of similar references are in books and articles and internet pages going back to the 19th century. Godfrey's Handbook of Hawaii, 1899. Quote, Princess Lilly donated to the British government the land for the erection of a monument to Captain Cook, the discoverer of Hawaii. And this monument was built by the British on land that's owned by the British, that was given to them by Princess Lilly. And this is at Kealakekua Bay on the Big Island of Hawaii on the southern coast, where Captain Cook was slain. And here's a close-up of the plaque. In memory of the great circumnavigator Captain James Cook, Royal Navy, who discovered these islands on the 18th of January, 1778, and fell near this spot on the 14th of February, 1779. And this monument was erected in 1874, dedicated to the discoverer of Hawaii. In the 1960s, when I was a teenager, I discovered references to an alternate version of how Hawaii was discovered by Europeans. For 223 years, you have to imagine this. Look at this map of the Pacific. On the right, you see Acapulco. About a third of the way across, you see Hawaii. And then way over to the left, more than 4,000 miles from Hawaii, is Manila. And for 223 years before Cook, Spanish galleons sailed yearly between Acapulco and Manila. Sailing west, they would go just south of the Big Island of Hawaii. And these ships could not have missed 2 of the world's tallest mountains and 3 active volcanoes visible for hundreds of miles. And this would be the galleon going from Acapulco to Manila, because the galleon going back would go up on a northern route to catch the currents that would take them back to Acapulco. So it was the one from Acapulco to Manila that would have discovered Hawaii if they did. In 1743, British Commodore George Anson captured a Spanish galleon near Acapulco, and it had a chart showing several islands, Grupo de la Mesa and Los Monjes, in the general location and exact latitude of Hawaii. This is before Cook discovered Hawaii. And then Captain Cook's own navigational chart of the Pacific, which I'm going to show you, included the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, and to the east, several islands, including ones called Los Mejos. Now, in November of 2013, I was staying in a hotel in Sydney, and there was a chart in the hallway of that's Captain Cook's chart, the replica. And here's the close-up. So this is Captain Cook's own chart. On the left, you see the Sandwich Islands, and you see the course that he took going around. And on his own chart, way over to the right, is a group of islands, and there's Los Mejos and La Mesa on Cook's chart. Cook's astronomer, William Bailey, he said that Hawaiian caps greatly resemble the Spanish, and the Hawaiians were really good at copying other things. And so the suggestion is that maybe the caps, the helmets that the Hawaiians made, this feathered cap to the left, was patterned after a Marine, a Spanish Marine on the right. Captain Cook's Lieutenant James King said this about Hawaiian cloaks, which were made of feathers. The resemblance to, quote, the cloak and helmet formerly worn by the Spaniards appears to me sufficient proof of its European origin. This is Captain Cook's own lieutenant. But when it is recollected that the course of the Spanish trade from Acapulco to the Manilas is but a few degrees to the south, this supposition will not in the least seem improbable. To the left here is Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz. And on Navy Day, 1945, he was given a great honor to be awarded investiture as an honorary High Chief of Hawaii. First VIP to be so honored since Roosevelt in 1933. And here he is on the steps of Iolani Palace wearing a feathered cape provided to him during this investiture. And on the right is a picture of a Spanish conquistador with his cape. Similarities. Reverend William Ellis was an early missionary in Hawaii, and he spoke fluent Hawaiian, and he went all over these islands. There's a great book about him, his journals of his wanderings all over the islands, and he recounted many historical things. And in his 1827 journal regarded fair-haired Ehu, descendants of Spanish explorers, and this is what he said. There are in the Sandwich Islands a number of persons distinguished by a lighter color in their skin and correspondingly brown curly hair called Ehu, who are, by all the natives of the islands, considered as the descendants of these foreigners. And he's talking to people, Hawaiians here, that lived before Cook. They were talking about things that had happened earlier before Cook. In 1823, Reverend Ellis was told by Hawaiians 3 accounts of foreigners arriving in Hawaii before Cook. Our great king Kalakaua wrote a book called Legends and Myths of Hawaii in 1888. And he says in that book, Juan Gaetano, the captain of a Spanish galleon sailing from the Mexican coast to the Spice Islands, discovered Hawaii as early as 1555. That's 200 years before Cook. And in 1838, David Malo's Ka Mo'olelo Hawaii describes shipwrecked Haole. Haole means stranger, is Hawaiian for stranger. Today they refer to basically white people, but stranger. Haole survivors landing on Hawaii during the reign of Keli'i o Kaloa in 1521 to 1530. Also, Cook found the presence of iron on Kauai when he landed there. I think that's information's interesting. I don't completely subscribe that is proof, because you could have flotsam and jetsam land on these shores with iron, and they could have iron from that. Here's a pre-Cook chant. Now, the Hawaiians did not have a written language until the missionaries came in the 1820s. And so their history was in chants, and they were elaborate. I have friends that know some of these chants. Some of them take 3 days to relate, and the Hawaiians will learn them and pass them on to their children and on antiquity to talk about where they came from. I know Hawaiians that know what wave from Tahiti that their ancestors came over 1,000 years ago. So here's a chant, a pre-Cook chant of Ku'ali'i, who was the king of the island of Oahu, about his trip to Kahiki. Kahiki is a foreign place. Kahiki is like Tahiti. The Hawaiians used a K, the Tahitians used a T, but it's the same language. And he went to a foreign place called Kahiki, and which perhaps suggests he might have been picked up by a Spanish galleon and transported to Acapulco. And this is what his chant said. A land with a strange language is Kahiki. Didn't know the language. The men of Kahiki have ascended the backbone of heavens, mountains. Up there they trample down. They look down on those below. Men of our race are not in Kahiki. It's a different race. One kind of man is in Kahiki, the Haole. He is like a god. I am like a man indeed. In 1790, John Young was captured by Hawaiians and became an advisor to King Kamehameha. He was a sailor, a British sailor. And Hawaiians told Young that 150 years before Cook, 2 white men landed in Hawaii on a boat. He saw their descendants who were white, not dark. This is from the book Our Islands and Their People, dated 1899. It seems from the most reliable authorities that Gaetano, we keep hearing Gaetano, a Spanish navigator, first recorded the discovery of these islands in 1542, well more than 200 years before Cook. One of the greatest explorers, navigators ever to sail the seas was the French explorer Jean-François Galop de la Pérouse. In 1786, I find this fascinating. Remember I showed you the chart of Cook that showed La Mesa to the right and the Sandwich Islands to the left? Well, the La Pérouse decided to look for Los Mejos to the east of Hawaii. And he went there with his ships, and they sailed all around where it appeared on the charts, on his charts. And he searched in vain for Los Mejos, and he concluded, Pérouse concluded that they were in fact Hawaii, and that, quote, it appears certain that these islands were first discovered by Gaetan in 1542. The Spanish Encyclopedia Universal Ilustrada Europeo Americano in 1925 has these entries. It says in 1527, an expedition by Alvaro de Saavedra lost a ship in the vicinity of Hawaii. 2 of the crew survived to marry native Hawaiians. In 1555, it states that a Spanish navigator, Juan Gaetano, there he is again, visited the Hawaiian Islands, naming them Las Islas de Mesa. The Spanish consider Gaetano the discoverer of Hawaii. You go to Spain, they will tell you Gaetano was the discoverer of Hawaii, not Cook. And in 1567, Alvaro Mendana de Nera visited Hawaii and made the first chart of its location. James Jackson's Jarvis's History of the Hawaiian Islands in 1872 described Spanish visitors here between 1530 and 1600. Quote, we have several accounts of the arrival of different parties of foreigners. In the reign of Kapu Akahuna, which is a priest, arrived at Kohala, the northwest point of the Big Island of Hawaii. He was a white man. During his life, a party of white men are said to have landed on the southwest part of the island and gone inland and taken up their abode in the mountains. This is in 1872. Here's some more. In 1865, the Madrid Hydrographical Department states, discovery of Hawaii dates from the year 1555 or 223 years before Captain Cook, and the discoverer was Juan Gaetano, or Gaetan. This is an interesting point. Syphilis was a uniquely European disease from the 1490s. Didn't have it in the Pacific. The remains of a woman unearthed at Barber's Point, used to be a naval air station, whose bones showed signs of congenital syphilis dating from before 1664. And then 8 years after Cook, La Perouse's surgeon found several women on Maui infected with advanced syphilis that would have taken 12 to 15 years to develop. In other words, they had to have acquired syphilis prior to Cook's arrival. You know, all of the histories of West going into indigenous places in Americas and in the Pacific are followed by horrible diseases that they have no immunities for. And I always thought, boy, there ought to be some evidence that these early Spanish, if they were here, that there was some disease that followed. And I found what I'm showing you here only about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm still learning. It's been 6 decades, but I'm still learning. The 19th century, 1800s, Hawaiian historian John Papai'i reported that during the pre-Cook time of Milu, foreigners landed and traveled throughout the islands, and that wherever they went, they left a wake of, quote, fevers, chills, headaches, and pani, severe pain in the chest and choking, and death. And that is consistent with all of the Western contact with indigenous peoples in the Americas and in the Pacific. Maybe some of these words in Hawaiian came from the Spanish. We don't know. The Hawaiian word pono, good, it sounds a little like bueno, Spanish. The Hawaiian word pua'a for pig sounds a little like Spanish puerco. And the Hawaiian poco for short sounds like the Spanish word poco. And the Hawaiian word for mountain, mauna, sounds a little like the Spanish Montana. And both Hawaiian and Spanish use the word ala to mean a road or a path. I just discovered this last week, so I'm still on my own journey of discovery. But there are Hawaiian folk tales. And when I say folk tales, I mean legends that go back before recorded Hawaiian history, before the missionaries came here, before Cook. These are legends that Hawaiians passed down. And they passed down legends that appear to sound just like the lessons of Genesis. There were 3 main Hawaiian kings, Kane, Ku, and Lono. And they were considered a trinity that existed before they created the heavens and the earth. And they did. They created the heavens and the earth. And then they created man in the likeness of Kane, who's the main Hawaiian god. And then they created a woman from his rib. The tales tell of a forbidden fruit that Kane tabooed the Ohia hemolele, the sacred mountain apple that we have here today, that he had tabooed it, but they ate of it. And it was connected, therefore, with troubles that befell the first Hawaiian man and woman. There was also a devil that disobeyed, it was an angel that disobeyed Kane and was sent to an inferno. Also, there was a flood that destroyed all living things on the earth for their sins. And Kane tells Kahuna Hu'u, Noah, Kahuna means a great a priest, to build a large boat, saving his wife and their 3 sons and their wives. And eventually, after the flood cleared, they landed on the top of Mauna Kea. And the suggestion is, did the Hawaiian learn these legends from Spanish galleons in the 16th and 17th century? They came from before Cook. So where did they come from? Ganath Obasikra, Princeton emeritus professor of anthropology, wrote The Apotheosis of Captain Cook, great book. I communicated with him a few years ago let me back up there, in 2012, because I was so intrigued. And I was telling him about my belief that Cook was preceded by the Spanish. And he wrote me from Sri Lanka. Many thanks for your nice note on my Cook book. It's got a sense of humor. You were right about the Spanish, and it's a shame it's being neglected among scholars. I've always had the fantasy, me too, that something might turn up in the Spanish archives or that Cook's own lost journal may appear somewhere. But in my retirement here in Sri Lanka, these fantasies recede into a blur. But it is so nice hearing from you, and I wish I could visit Hawaii once again, but alas, age and travel do not go well together. Best wishes, Ganat. I went to Amsterdam about a decade ago, and I knew that the Dutch made the most, they were the foremost makers of maps and globes of the 16th and 17th centuries. The Dutch cartographers that hand painted these maps and globes were exquisite. And I found original pre-Cook globes and maps with a group of islands about Hawaii's location. And these maps all have these, so they're different permutations of these names. La Mesa, the table, the top of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa could be called a table. Los Monges, the monks or friars, I don't know where that's from. La Vecina, the neighbor. La Desgraciada, the unfortunate one. Los Volcans or volcanos, we got volcanoes. And without an exception, in every map and globe that I've found, and you're going to see it, and it's going to be just, you're going to be amazed by what I'm going to show you, all consistently plotted these islands on the exact latitude of Hawaii. Now, Hawaii is around roughly 19 to 21 degrees north latitude. So you see California way over to the right, and you see Hawaii. This 1665 Dutch map, original, that I saw in the Amsterdam National Maritime Museum by cartographer Jean Blau, shows there's California, and there's Los Monges, La Vecina, La Desgraciada, right on Hawaii's latitude. This is a 1635 Dutch map by cartographer William Blau. And you see here Los Monges, La Vecina, and La Desgraciada. Here's another 1665 Dutch globe, same. This is a 1728 Dutch globe by cartographers Gerard and Leonard Valk. You see California to the right, and there's Los Monges, La Desgraciada. This is a 1662 Dutch map by cartographer Frederick de Witt, and it's kind of fuzzy, but the close-up shows Los Monges right on Hawaii's latitude, 21 degrees. This is the oldest map I found, 1579, by Flemish cartographer Ortelius, and it has Hawaii as Los Volcans. There's California to the right, 1579. 1594 map of the world by Dutch astronomer Petrus Plancius shows Hawaii as Los Monges and La Desgraciada. 1594. Here's a 1610 by Venetian geographer Giuseppe Rosaccio's map of the world, and there's Los Volcanos. 1775. This is 3 years before Cook. English cartographers, Sayers and Bennett shows Los Monges, La Mesa, and La Desgraciada right on Hawaii's latitude. And you see California there to the right. Late Hawaiian artist Herb Kawanui Kane, who was a friend of mine, wrote a book called Voyagers. And he references a 1613 globe in England's National Maritime Museum, which illustrates a cluster of small islands roughly where Hawaii ought to be. And he believed fervently that the Spanish were here long before Cook. And my late friend Alan Lloyd found pre-cooked globes in Innsbruck, Austria, and Australia's James Cook Historical Museum, portraying islands roughly at Hawaii's location. All these maps and globes place the islands exactly on Hawaii's latitude, but it's always about 500 to 700 miles to the east, as you saw on Cook's own map. Why? Navigators know that plotting your position on Earth requires, you got to know two things to find out where you are. You got to know where you are on the longitude, which is east and west, to the east and west. The longitude goes from the North Pole to the South Pole. And you want to know where you are, north or south, and those are meridians called latitude. So if you know where you are on longitude and latitude, you know exactly where you are. When you're finding out the north-south latitude, it's very easy, very simple. In the northern hemisphere, your latitude is the degrees of the North Star above the horizon. Or you can also take a shot of the noon sun, and you can know where you are, north or south. But calculating longitude, east and west, is a difficult thing. You have to measure the angle of a number of stars, at least 3, in order to triangulate. And you have to know the time where you are, and you have to know the time ashore at a known location. You need those two things, and you need an algorithm star table. And with that, you can plot your longitude. Now, before Cook, no one could plot longitude. They could all plot north-south latitude. So, lacking a clock that could keep time at sea, a pendulum didn't work. There was no way for them to accurately plot longitude, east and west. And even top navigators got lost once away from land. Ships wrecked on reefs and shores. Many just disappeared, never heard from again. The solution to longitude was sought throughout American history. And I commend this book. It's called Longitude, The True Story of a Lone Genius Who Solved the Greatest Scientific Problem of His Time. Britain posted a reward for anybody that could come up with longitude, to solve longitude. Imagine if you wanted to go to the New World from England, basically you'd sail south to a latitude. If you wanted to go to New York, you'd go to the latitude of New York and you'd turn right. You couldn't do the hypotenuse. You had to go down to that latitude and turn. So it's a longer journey. But the solution to longitude happened in the 1770s when John Harrison finally came up with his marine chronometer. And you can see it in Greenwich if you go to Greenwich. It's a big clock, about this big. And there's a picture of it there on my slide. And Cook was the first navigator with an accurate marine chronometer. He had the Harrison clock. And he accurately surveyed wherever he went, all over the Pacific. And when my dad was in World War II, they were sailing around the Pacific, the Western Pacific, and their charts would have islands that the chart said, last surveyed by Cook. And he said, he was very accurate. He was not very far off when they had more sophisticated surveying equipment in World War II. So galleons traveling from Acapulco to Manila had a 1.2 knot trailing current. So by the time they reached Hawaii, they were hundreds of miles east of their plotted location, which means they plotted Hawaii on their charts to the east of Hawaii's actual location because they've been pushed along. And Herb Connie told me these are the reasons why Los Montes appears so many hundreds of miles east of Hawaii on pre-Cook charts. And here's Herb Connie's painting of the Manila galleon, his vision of the Manila galleon approaching Hawaii. There's the Mauna Kea and Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa in the distance. Contra Authority, Dahlgren. His 1916 book, Were the Hawaiian Islands Visited by the Spaniards Before their discovery by Captain James Cook? People were saying it was a Spanish, and he said no. He disputes the pre-Cook discovery by the Spanish, and he claims Los Monges were actually part of the Marianas, including Guam. But look at this chart. Los Monges is way over here in the east, the Pacific, and Las Islas de Ladrones, that's Guam, that's the Marianas. That's 4,000 miles to the west. The Spanish navigators were not good on longitude, but they weren't that bad. They were maybe a few hundred miles off, but they weren't 4,000 miles off. Even Dahlgren admitted that it cannot entirely be refuted that records may be missing, and Gaitan may have discovered Hawaii without leaving any trace. And he says, I put forward no claim to be able to give a quite definitive solution to the problem of whether the alleged discovery of Hawaii by the Spaniards can be either established or definitively rejected. And he admits that Spanish galleons traveling from Acapulco, that Hawaii, they were traveling at 11 to 17 degrees north latitude, and Hawaii is 19 degrees. So at its closest, the galleon could pass 138 miles south of Hawaii. The top of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa can be seen at 139 miles, and the eruption can be seen further because they go up thousands of feet. They can be seen at 170 or more miles. Regarding 6 pre-Cook galleons lost without a trace, Dahlgren writes, it's not incredible that one of these ships or some other ship of which we have no knowledge stranded on some rock or reef belonging to the Hawaiian group, and that shipwrecked men succeeded in reaching the inhabited islands in boats. Amen. Amen. So there's my evidence. Was Captain Cook the first European to discover Hawaii? Or was it someone else? Was it the Spanish? Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent bit of history that I'm sure very few of us had given much thought to, pre-Captain Cook explorations. And that brings up, your comments about Hawaii's words that seem to come from the Spanish. How similar are the various Polynesian cultures? Obviously, they've had thousands of years to develop their own stories, their own myths. And this particular myth of the 3 kings creating the world, I hadn't heard that one before. I'd heard other myths.
I just discovered it last week, as I said.
So clearly, growing up, you must have heard other creation myths that come from the Hawaiian tradition.
Yeah, there's Pele, who is the goddess of the mountain, and Lono. I always knew about Lono because he provided rain, and my grandfather always put out okolihau is a brandy thing made from distilled tea root, and he would put bottles of okolihau in the yard if he was having a party to assuage Lono, so he wouldn't rain on his party. And I never saw a storm at one of his parties if he had that okolihau out in the garden. But the Hawaiians, all the Polynesians could communicate. So Hawaiians can communicate with Maoris.
Okay, and along those lines, when I see pictures of, let's say, Maori warriors, that they dress very differently than Hawaiians. So, with those differences in attire,
they had different.
Support your thesis.
They had well, they had different. They developed different. They remember these people developed over centuries
Right.
and far reaches. They had different types of tattoos. Um, the Hawaiians were the greatest navigators of their era. You imagine over 1,500 years ago, the Polynesians had inhabited every inhabited island that was inhabitable in Polynesia, meaning, Easter Island one end and New Zealand another and Hawaii on the top and everything in between. They were phenomenal navigators. But
Sure. And I
they
recall being fascinated with Thor Heyerdahl and his um,
yeah, yeah.
exploits in navigation, not only just Kon-Tiki, but traveling between South America and Hawaii, and or South America and Fiji, um, using totally star navigations and
Mhm.
wave patterns. And so clearly, there's also, given the Spanish development in South America, and again, it's speculative, it's possible, but the likely communication between the Polynesians and the folks living in South America, whether they be indigenous folks
Yeah.
or Spanish, or the hybrid spawn of both. um, you know, how was it? And has there been more recent discussion of how aggressively people ignored the information that was before their eyes? For example, all those pre-cooked charts that showed the
Yeah.
islands being where they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah. They're to me, they're overwhelming. I remember one of I actually I have a friend that has Cook's journals that were published. I mean, original. This is, I mean, going back to 1700s, original bound, and in it are these flimsies that open up with the charts. I opened it up, and I was in my 20s or something. I opened it up, and there are the Sandwich Islands, and La Mesa to the east. I was so excited to see that because I was in the early part of my journey, trying to track down all this evidence. And there's other evidence that I haven't even put into my presentation here because it just gets more. There's so much more.
In his own diaries, did Cook intimate that he had discovered these islands, or was this a myth that came in his wake?
No, he thought he discovered these islands. He certainly was the first person to um, publicize the existence of the islands. He named them for the Earl of Sandwich, or Sandwich Isles. So he made it famous. Um, I I was walking around Hampton Court Palace, and there was a guy pretending to be Henry VIII in an outfit, and he came up to me and he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Hawaii." And he said, "Where's that?" And I said, "It's in the Pacific. You won't discover it for 200 years."
How did you react to that?
He went, "Whoa!"
That's terrific.
But he made Hawaii famous. Everybody knew about Hawaii after Cook.
Okay, so again, he had
And
a better publicist.
and this is just my opinion. I don't. The Spanish didn't publicize it because Hawaii didn't have anything the Spanish needed, like gold,
Right.
but it was a place they could stop to provision and get water if they needed it. So they weren't publicizing these islands. They got out on the charts, the Dutch charts and the Venetian charts and things, but they weren't publicizing it. So they were keeping it close to their vest.
Okay, and as I recall from some of the various histories and historical fictions about that era, um, pilots that knew how to get from Point Alpha to Point Bravo across the globe were highly prized, and their secrets were very aggressively protected. You
Sure.
just look at the opening of Japan, or the attempts of the Portuguese to gain their
Hmm.
toehold in
Hmm.
Japan. And of course, no doubt the Portuguese followed a similar path, unless they came around Cape Horn to get to Japan. More down the African coast and over from Horn, rather than crossing the Pacific.
There are references and beliefs that among the foreigners that landed here before Cook were the Chinese and Japanese fishermen that got blown off course and were shipwrecked here. So there's references to others that came here.
So I guess if you are shipwrecked and make the islands your home, you're not considered a discoverer, because you're not
Well,
getting the word out. You need to be a
right.
publicist to be a
You're,
discoverer.
you're right. They say that the person that writes the first book is going to define the history,
Exactly.
and Cook basically defined it with his journal.
So, speaking of Cook and his several circumglobal navigations, we were talking earlier, and maybe we have a few minutes you could share about, the last week of Cook's life. His final words to the Hawaiians
Yeah.
weren't
he
what we might have expected them to be.
it, no, it may be that when he came during a time of celebration on the Big Island, and they believed that they thought he was the god Lono, and that he'd come ashore, and they really they fed him, they had parties, they danced, they sang, anything he gave them, they gave him so much. And so finally he was off on his further voyage of discovery, and he had some kind of a breakdown, and he had to go back. And the Hawaiian said, "Oh my God, this guy Lono's coming back. It's just we don't have enough pigs and breadfruit and papayas and things to feed this guy." Anyway, the Hawaiians also kept stealing stuff like a boat and anything metal, nails, and so he wanted the boat back or something like that. And so he went up and he grabbed this kahuna, this priest or some big shot, may have been the king, I don't know. And he's going to take him over to hold him hostage, put him on the boat. And the Hawaiians are going, "This is bad. It doesn't, can't do this." And they started to get close, and they were yelling, and they had rocks on sticks. And anyway, there was a melee, and in the course of it, he gets killed. He gets killed on 1778, and the few Marines from the ship got back on the ship, and they dragged away Cook. Well, they weren't going to leave Cook there, so they demanded that they return Cook. Well, by the time they returned Cook, he'd already been eaten, and they scraped bones, and so they returned bones, and I don't think they returned them all. But that was considered, you're getting the mana of this guy by eating him, and holding the bones gives you power. So I don't think they gave him all up, but anyway, that's what happened to Cook.
So then, did the surviving crew bring what was left of Cook's bones back with them
Yeah,
to Portsmouth?
yeah.
Was it Portsmouth they returned to?
I think they did.
Yeah.
I think that's Portsmouth was. That's the main Navy port.
You know,
That's where the Victory, HMS Victory is.
as a microbiologist, I was fascinated by your comment about Western diseases. And of course, there's been a lot of ink spilled about how we can trace Western exploration, and by Western, I mean European exploration, by the advent of various
Yeah,
European centric diseases
yeah.
on the North American continent, the South American continent, the
Yeah.
islands across the Pacific. And again, it was probably mid 20th century before we really had a sense for the epidemiology of what moved around. So I can understand why writers earlier wouldn't connect the dots that
Yeah.
if European diseases had already been prevalent on the islands long before Cook's crew arrived, somebody from Europe had to have been carrying the diseases, must have,
Yeah.
spent time there previously.
So when Cook got here, there were several 100,000 Hawaiians. That's what there's wide range of estimates, but several 100,000. And by the mid 1800s, it was down to around 50. So within 2 generations, they were decimated.
I guess that means, credit to Cook's crew, the surviving Hawaiian population had already developed immunities to
I don't. It was
a lot of these diseases.
once Cook discovered the islands, the whalers came here, and it became a major place to pre-provision for whaling. So it was totally opened up to the world,
Right.
and the accounts that I have read about what happened to Hawaiians that got these Western civilization diseases that are nothing to us, measles, and I mean we survive it, but they were terrible deaths. It's really awful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, in our lifetimes, measles, mumps, rubella were still diseases that one of the reasons why the average ages jumped is we included all the kids that died before the age of 5. And so it's a biased average. I love, Samuel Clemens said there's lies, Dan lies, and statistics. So
Right.
a lot of these diseases, just if you survive to the age of 5, you'd probably develop the immunities. And so I'm guessing that, by time Cook and then the folks that were using it as whaling port, how did Hawaii develop post Captain Cook's publicizing its existence? What towns, can you tell us a little bit about what towns grew up as whaling colonies, for example, early on, and which developed later on? I mean, I know Waikiki was not always the home of, was it Fort DeRussy?
Right. Well, first of all, when Cook came here, each island was a separate kingdom.
Right.
And Kamehameha was a minor chief on the Big Island. Well, not so minor, but he wasn't the king.
Right.
And so after Cook, Kamehameha basically united the islands. It was a very bloody period, but he united the islands. He was never the only island he was unable to subjugate by military force was Kauai, but eventually had a treaty with them. So he united all of the islands. So he's the King Kamehameha the Great is the one who united the Hawaiian Islands. And then whalers were already coming here, and his capital was Lahaina, where my great-grandmother was born in 1846. And that was a great whaling port because it's in the lee of the island. It's not a harbor, but it's in the lee of it, and it's a perfect place to anchor. So it's a great place for whalers. And then the other was off Honolulu Harbor on Oahu. But those were the two main whaling ports, shipping ports.
Right.
And still are. I mean,
sure.
for shipping. So
let's see. I don't see any other comments being posted, and we're coming up towards the top of the hour. So again, I'll I could keep asking you questions all night long, but Again, one of the things I repent is that my prospective thesis advisor went and died on me while I was on active duty. So I wasn't able to matriculate at University of Hawaii for my graduate work.
Oh,
I wound
oh,
up in another warm climate, Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Talk
oh,
about shocking changes between diving off Vietnam coast and then going off and a few weeks later diving off the New Hampshire coast.
oh.
That was definitely a cultural shock. Lo, those many years ago. Well, again, I want to thank you for sharing all of bits of your knowledge. I know that in a brief period like this, you can only share a sliver of what you've learned over the years, and
Yeah.
it's terrific to learn that you are still discovering bits that are out there.
Yeah.
And people could have put together half a century ago, but haven't, or just it
Mhm.
still waits for you to bring these pieces together. So I look forward to maybe seeing some articles in Naval History Magazine or other venues, um, more on this as you discover more as you continue your work. So again, thank you. I want to thank those who
Thank
are
you, Kevin.
watching us live this evening, and go ahead and thank all of you who I anticipate will be watching us asynchronously uh, when you visit our YouTube recording of this evening's presentation. We have a program scheduled for August, and I look forward to getting that posted in the next 2, 3 days as I get a title and as I get the biography and program synopsis. This will be one of our first presentations from a merchant mariner. And so we're going to get a different perspective on U.S. maritime history next month. Again, wish everybody a terrific. And I want to thank Jim and Jerry. These are also, by the way, for those who may not realize it, Mike is a Continental Commandery companion. And we've gotten kudos from Jerry Rovner, who is the Naval Orders Vice Commander General for Commandery Support, and from Jim Tritton, who's also presented and who has posted one of what will be a series of biographical sketches, um, personal histories on the Commandery's website. And look forward to reading more from Jim. So thank you guys both for your comments posted to the StreamYard. You're actually the first people in almost 3 years who've posted banners as listeners. With that, then I want to wish everybody a great evening and smooth sailing to all. Like, one more comment before I sign out. Okay, it was just Jim had posted his comments about uh, he and Jerry Rovner both posting their comments about how much they enjoyed this evening's presentation. And with that, we'll sign off and see you all in August.